Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on The Real Story as we officially kick off the 2025 legislative session here in Connecticut. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. We're back at the state capitol as the budget process begins while potential new laws are being crafted. We can't forget this is a historic Democratic majority here in Connecticut, veto-proof, in fact, quite different from the Republican wave we saw nationally this past election. Lawmakers here tell us, though, bipartisanship is the name of the game in the state as Connecticut reckons with changing federal funding, no pandemic-era grants, and a lot to get done. This morning, we're sitting down in studio with two leaders from their parties, State Representative Corey Paris, the new House Chair of the Committee on Children, and Vice Chair of the all-important Appropriations Committee, who will oversee the state's spending this year. Also joining us, Representative Dave Rutigliano from the 123rd District, a Trumbull businessman. He's the Deputy House Republican leader this session, serving on powerful committees, General Law, Finance, Revenue and Bonding, and the Tax Writing Committee and Judiciary. Thank you so much, both of you, for being with us here this morning. We appreciate it.
Good morning.
Thanks for having us.
So, as I said, obviously back here in Hartford, back at the Capitol this week. It was exciting as we opened the session. There are so many things at play here and so much for us to talk about over the next couple months. But first, I just want to start off with how everything's feeling being back at the Capitol. Representative Paris, we'll start with you.
It's really painful to spend 8 months of not spending time with Rutigliano, so I'm glad that the session's bringing us back closer together.
Everyone says it's like the first day of school. You all get to see each other again after that summer and then fall break. Is that how you're feeling too?
Yes, it's good to get back to work. You know, it's the pomp and circumstance of opening day sort of, means the start of the session.
Yep.
And let's get back to work and get down to business.
Yeah. Absolutely. So with the start of this long session, the budget process has also begun. We know we won't hear many concrete proposals until the governor gives his address in February. But a lot of lawmakers told me this week when the session kicked off, they kind of feel like this is a holding pattern since we have the new administration starting in D.C., could see changes in terms of federal funding to Connecticut. We also can't forget about the term of the past couple years, the fiscal guardrails, as we look at all of this. So, Representative Paris, we'll start with you. Talk to me about the task in front of you on the Appropriations Committee right now.
Well, it's quite difficult, but I think a lot of things that we should mention is the facts. And the facts is that we've paid down nearly $8 billion of any of our liabilities in terms of our debts. And we've also have saved, and we have a rainy day fund that exceeds $4 billion. That's something to be proud of. A budget tells you a lot about your priorities in the state, and I think that certainly putting money back into the hands of working families, of small businesses, is a priority for us this year, and I think that we can learn to do that through the budget process.
Yeah.
The fiscal guardrails is really the genius that came out of the bipartisan budget. Connecticut has benefited immeasurably from them. We went from a permanent fiscal crisis to surpluses as far as the eye could see.
Yep.
But really, we use the term budget. What we really mean is affordability. What can we do this session to make it easier for families to afford to stay here in Connecticut? Because we all know this is an expensive state, and it's only getting more expensive all the time.
And we know affordability, definitely the name of the game this year from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. Representative Rutigliano, you're not just serving in Republican leadership. You were once on your town's Board of Finance, not new to crafting budgets. What do you think? Should Connecticut be spending more? We know we've heard from some lawmakers about possibly adjusting the guardrails to allow for more wiggle room as we see groups coming to the Capitol saying they need more money.
So I don't support fundamentally changing the guardrails because they have worked. Can we have conversations about whether the rainy day fund is too full because it's not really that rainy just yet? The area where we think should be a priority is sort of helping the towns out and fully funding our special education and some of the education needs that each town requires, because it's getting more expensive. It could possibly use some reform, but it certainly could use some more dollars.
And Corey, how do we balance that then when you have groups, whether it be nonprofits, colleges and universities, coming to the Capitol and saying we need more funding? And sometimes I know, especially with last session and the session prior, the last budget term, lawmakers felt like sometimes their hands were tied a little bit.
Well, I'm not a meteorologist, but I do have to agree with my colleague here. It's not raining right now, and I do think that there are ways for us to examine and have healthy debate about how we put more money into the things that matter most to the residents. And so university and higher education system is really important. Child care is extremely important. affordability of housing is important. So I think at the end of the day, this is a government for the people, by the people, and we need to do everything that we can to sustain and help people get by and get ahead.
Absolutely. And our next segment coming up, we will have the governor here, and we'll, of course, be talking more about all of this with him and his role right now. But at the end of the day, you know, a budget has to be passed come June here. And I know both of you, in your own ways, have a deep focus on what people here in the state of Connecticut need and want. Corey, you said at the start, a budget really shows what the state's priorities are, what you're hoping to fund. We'll start with you. What do you think those investments should look like this year?
Well, certainly, and I agree, again, with colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I think special education is a real priority for us. The unevenness in terms of how that funding is trickling down to that particular part of education system is critical for us to find some reprieve for families. Child care, once again, is at the forefront in terms of finding more opportunities for affordability for families. Student loan reimbursement is really critical for us, and housing. So all of these things combined, and if people feel money back in their pockets, they'll feel better about having to go to the grocery store, filling up their gas tanks. And that's something that we all agree upon.
And what is the GOP really standing behind in this budget push and pull this session?
So we understand that there's things that the government has to do, and we have to fund certain things. But the government should only do what it's supposed to and no more. If there is extra money, if we're collecting too much, we need to return it to the taxpayers of Connecticut so they can spend it as they choose. That's our basic position.
Are there any other pockets? I know obviously we were talking about special ed, colleges and universities, housing. Are there any pockets that you feel like the party is really looking at this session?
Pockets for savings for consumers? Well, we're going to have...
Or different areas of the budget that you think, you know, maybe need to be looked at, some different sectors here.
Well, we think people certainly need relief in their electric bill. We need to have a discussion about the public benefit. And I understand that public benefit has many parts to it. But there's parts that shouldn't be in there that maybe possibly should be taken over by the state and should give residents relief. Also, the way that system works, the way PURE works, we believe it should be reformed. Because I believe what they've done in this particular issue, making it a 10-month payback for hundreds of millions of dollars, was a little unreasonable and really put a stress on a lot of families here in Connecticut.
And we're at the end of the supply chain, have some of the most expensive utility bills in the state. So a lot of this in the country, excuse me. So a lot of this debate as well is around how do we get more supply. The governor mentioned offshore wind in his State of the State. You know, how are both of you feeling about those debates going into this session?
Well, I think it's every debate, right? Any decision that we're making right now in this biennium is certainly for the next 20 to 30 years in terms of the impact that we will feel in terms of what we're funding and also the policies that we're enacting. So if we're going to go big on energy, which I think the governor implied that we would, and we can find a bipartisan approach to doing that, I think that's going to be good for us down the road. I think we do the same thing for education, for higher ed, for childcare, for housing. We can lead the charge, and we can make sure that Connecticut is a state where people are moving into, staying for generations to come instead of fleeing.
Kind of the short and long term of maybe spending more investment now for lower prices later, but also still making sure people aren't feeling that burn right now because the state, you know, is doing so well fiscally, but people still see such high prices and are struggling with lack of affordability.
We need more supply of energy in Connecticut. The New York State's preventing a pipeline for natural gas to get through. Most of our energy comes from natural gas. 48% comes from Millstone. Millstone has been approved and can add another reactor, whether it's a full reactor or one of the modular reactors. We're going to need more electricity. Everybody wants to electrify, but we need to make the grid more sustainable, and we need more electricity. Something has to be done.
Yeah. And an example here of, you know, bipartisan success, as well as kind of putting our money where our mouth is and making it more affordable, rewarding people for staying here in Connecticut, the student loan reimbursement program. It started January 1st. Representative Paris, what's the response been like so far for that?
Well, the response has been overwhelming. I mean, it's been about a week and a half, and so since the program has went live, there's been nearly 1,000 applications. Some of them have been approved. The Office of Higher Education has said that they've had nearly 3,000 emails and/or phone calls about the program. Many parents we're seeing actually trying to get the reimbursement if they hold a Parent Plus loan. We see a lot of students rushing to get some of their volunteer hours done. But again, this is a reimbursement program that was bipartisan, that we worked on with Republicans. I was proud to work on it here with Representative Rutigliano. And I think that it's a good opportunity for us to show how we can take taxpayers' dollars and give the taxpaying dollars back to that taxpayer.
I was really excited when Representative Paris first proposed it. We had a couple of ideas, and to his credit, he adopted them. We thought that trade schools, students that take out loans for trade schools, should be included, and to his credit, he absolutely included it.
Yeah.
And that's why this bill's bipartisan. I think it's smart, and I was proud to work with him on it, and I'm glad we did it.
And Representative Rutigliano, before we wrap up here in our last couple minutes, we know committees are kicking off now and already getting busy in this long session. Our state here requires public hearings, which I think is something unique to Connecticut and something I've heard from all the different state lawmakers that we've talked to is really exciting for them, because you all encourage emails, you encourage letters and calls to your office. I want to start with you. What's your pitch as to why it's important to not just keep track of the session, but to get involved as a constituent?
We're a unique state. We have a unique process. We have committee meetings and we have raised bills. No bill could become law unless it has a public hearing. And our public hearings have no time limit. So they could start one day and end the next.
Sometimes a good thing, sometimes a bad thing.
But you know what? It's our process. Yeah. We all stick to it, and I think we're proud of it.
Yeah.
I am proud when I go back to my constituents and say, listen, you want this bill? I'll raise it for you, but you got to come up and talk about it, and you got to sell it to the rest of the committee. I think we have a good process.
Yeah, and Representative Paris, anything you want to add there? Any, moments from the last session, or maybe something you're looking forward to already that someone's brought up to you?
Well, I'm really excited to talk about the policies that we're talking about that's going to be able to energize our residents and energize them around maybe seeing government on their side and helping them to find some relief and some reprieve to some of the challenges that they're facing. I certainly know in the Children's Committee we're concerned about immigrant children who might be displaced from their families and trying to figure out a way to protect those children without them being lost in a system. I know that we're looking at child care through the Children's Committee and the various proposals that are out there to find relief for parents and children and providers who on average are only making $26,000 a year. So there are a lot of things that we have before us that are going to require some big investments. But this is why we're elected, to do this big work, but we're doing it with those who've sent us here to represent them.
Yeah, definitely a lot to get done in these next couple months, and I'm sure we'll be checking in with both of you throughout the session, and also great example of our bipartisanship here in Connecticut. We really appreciate you both coming on to share a little bit of insight.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Don't go anywhere, though. We still have more coming up on The Real Story. We're sitting down with Governor Ned Lamont next, talking all things session, his stance on the budget guardrails, and looking ahead to President-elect Trump's inauguration just days away. Stay with us.